Hello everybody, welcome back to a new video. My name is Sarah and today I'm going to go through my January wrap-up. Now for the first month of 2022 I read 7 books and I definitely think that this was a super strong reading month for me. So the first book right off the bat, starting 2022 off like incredibly strong. I could not have asked for a better first book of the year, and that is Middle Game by Shauna Maguire. This book, I've heard several people just rave about it, and so I'd been really curious about it. This cover is just like creepy, and then the synopsis just, you know, definitely caught my eye, and I had picked it up but had been putting it off for a little while, and I am glad that this is the first book that I read in 2022, but I'm kind of kicking myself for how long it took me to actually read it, get around to reading it, because holy moly guys, I'm absolutely obsessed, absolutely obsessed. So basically Middle Game is about this pair of artificially created twins, Roger and Dodger. So they are both geniuses in specified areas. Roger is a linguistic genius and Dodger is a mathematical genius. And we are following them from about the age of 10 over the course of maybe 20 years as they grow up, but we are not the only ones following their lives. They are being closely observed by the man who created them, because he hopes that they will reach a point in kind of their development where they will unlock the keys to the universe. So right from chapter 1, this book absolutely hooked me. Shauna Maguire's writing is absolutely gorgeous. It's one of my favorite types of writing styles. She's not overly flowery, but her specific words that she picks to describe things is just impeccable, particularly her emotional descriptions. This book is an emotional roller coaster for both Roger and Dodger as well as the reader, because Shauna Maguire does such an incredible job of making you absolutely fall in love with these twins and root for them. She writes sibling bonds so well, and kind of just how messy and complicated they are, just the emotions, both negative and positive, the joys, but also the kind of anxieties and the fears and the loneliness. She writes loneliness so well, and you just can't help but feel completely what the characters are feeling, and I was just incredibly impressed with that. Not to mention the kind of watching these twins grow up and kind of navigate through their lives is just incredibly fascinating. Even kind of these slower moments are still super engaging. There's a point in here where the book kind of flips on its head almost, I guess, in kind of your perception of what's been going on in this story, and it absolutely floored me. It's not necessarily flipped on its head, maybe it expands, it just explodes outward, and becomes so much bigger than what we had initially been understanding. And so you're kind of looking back through what you had already read, and you're just oh, that's very interesting to now put that in this perspective, and I just had a lot of fun with that. This is I think technically a standalone. There is a sequel coming out, but it sounds like it's following a different set of characters, maybe just kind of in this same world, but I definitely think it can be read as a standalone just fine. But yeah, I absolutely adored it, could not get enough of it, absolutely flew through this, and then just wanted to reread it the second I finished it. Needless to say, I gave this 5 stars, and I will be absolutely shocked if the first book that I read in 2022 does not end up very high on my top 10 favorites by the end of this year. After that, I read The Red Palace by June Her. I had received an arc of this from NetGalley and the publisher, so thank you so much to both of them for granting me access to this arc. This book has been published now, it is out. So this is a historical murder mystery. We're set in 1700s Korea, where there is a multiple homicide that occurs at kind of the nursing school in this city in Korea, and we're we're following a palace nurse as she teams up with kind of this like new up-and-coming investigator in order to solve this murder case once the palace nurse's mentor gets kind of framed and accused of the murder. And all while the accusations are happening, there are certain clues that are kind of making it look like the prince actually was the one to commit the murder. And so we are following our two main characters as they try to unravel who actually committed these murders. I had a lot of fun with this book. It actually kind of caught me by surprise, and it crept up on me quite a bit. I did not realize how engrossed I was in this story until I had to put the book down. Her definitely keeps the reader on their toes. She does this incredible job of weaving in palace conspiracies, blackmail, just different shady figures all around with these various different reasons to either have possibly committed the murder or frame somebody else to commit it. All like red herrings everywhere without any of them actually feeling like red herrings. So truly you're just like, I don't know which one of you actually did it, and I don't know which one of you I'm supposed to like think did it, but you know, they obviously didn't, you know, that kind of thing. So it definitely keeps you on your toes, keeps you thinking, keeps you guessing, and I just had a lot of fun with it all up until the very end. It's definitely, it's not like a high action book, but it has a high intensity feeling to it while being kind of like a quieter investigation. I absolutely adored our two main characters and kind of their dynamic between the two of them. It was perfectly written. I had a lot of fun reading their interactions and how they work together. And I also really enjoyed how this was a murder mystery, and I loved the mystery element to it, but I also really appreciated her exploration of gender and classism during this time period in Korea. The palace nurse is a bastard child, and so she, being a woman and then also being a bastard of kind of a high noble, has a lot to contend with socially, and we definitely spend a lot of time following her as she navigates through these different kind of inner and outer conflicts that she has, and I think that her did a very wonderful job of exploring that, and it was a very well added element to the story. If you're looking for either a good murder mystery or historical fiction or a historical mystery, I would definitely consider picking this up. I did give it 4 stars. After that, I read Redemptor by Jordan Fuego. This is the second and final book in the Raybearer duology. This is the gorgeous Fairloot edition with the stenciled edges. Since this is the second book, I'm not going to talk about what this one specifically is about in order to not spoil Raybearer, the first book. But in Raybearer, we follow our main character, Tarisai, and she is kind of raised in this household that is very strict in terms of her education, but her mother is kind of this distant figure, just termed the lady. And then one day Tarisai gets sent off to the capital in order to compete to become one of the crown prince's counts of 11. And during this competition, in order for somebody to become a member of the Council of 11, they have to learn to love the prince for who he is as a person, and not just as the figurehead of, you know, the country. And then once they have learned to love him, they are granted his ray. And then once they are granted the ray, they kind of have this like mind meld with the prince and the other counselors of the ray. But when Tarisai is shipped off, her mother, the lady, gives her one final command, and that is to kill the crown prince once she is given the ray. And so that's kind of where Raybearer starts off, and I liked how with Raybearer that storyline definitely felt very closed-circuited within Raybearer, and with Redemptor we get kind of like obviously a part 2, but it feels like its own story. Definitely think you have to read Raybearer before you read Redemptor, but just like as two entities, they feel very complete within each other. With Redemptor, I was kind of disappointed because while I absolutely adored Raybearer, this felt like it had something missing that made me love Raybearer so much, and I still cannot put my finger on what specifically it is. There was just like a fresh, vibrant feel to Raybearer that I didn't get in Redemptor. I still loved Tarisai, I still loved all the other characters and Tarisai's relationships with all of them, as well as kind of the world and the politics of this story. I just feel like there was a lot going on in this book that it almost would have helped if there was 100 extra pages in here. We kind of have almost 3 different plots going on in here, and this book was, in my opinion, too short in order to give all 3 of them kind of the necessary attention and detail that they needed in order to really make them all fully reach the potential that they had. I really loved the idea of all 3 of these plots, but I just was disappointed that we didn't get enough time focused on each of the 3, and I think that that really hurt this book a lot. I did really enjoy the ending, and I think it was a very well wrapped up second book for this entire duology. I wish that it was a little bit longer, or it was almost like a trilogy, but I did end up giving this 3.5 stars. Next, I read The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. This is the 3rd and final book in the Mistborn Era 1 trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. So again, since this is at the end of a series, I'm not going to talk about what this book is about, but Mistborn: The Final Empire is the first book, and so the first book kind of explores the idea of what happened if the good guy didn't win in kind of this big epic story, and instead the bad guy won, and kind of what the consequences of that would be. And so we are in a world that is just barren and desolate, and it is basically ran by this person called the Lord Ruler, and it has been this way for 1,000 years, and there has been several attempts at uprisings and overthrowing the Lord Ruler. However, all of them have failed, but our most recent attempt involves 2 Mistborns. They're able to control every single kind of magical element that there is. Most people that are able to control a magical element can only control 1, and they're called Mistings, so Mistborns are very rare, and we're following 2 of them as they are kind of leading a heist-like revolution against the Lord Ruler. Now, this 3rd book is much further along down the story than that, and I actually think while the first 2 books were very high stakes, high intensity, this one is at its all-time highest, which makes sense. It's the climactic ending to this trilogy, but I had a lot of fun with this one. I definitely enjoyed just the high action, the almost cinematic fight scenes that were in here, and kind of, again, how the magic of this world works with kind of the different metals having different properties once you ingest them. The characters in this book, we spend a lot of time looking into more of our characters that have been more side characters in the previous 2 books, which I really enjoyed because I really love how Sanderson writes his characters. They all feel very, very unique and very well fleshed out. We particularly follow my favorite character of this series, Sazed, a lot more in this 3rd one, and I absolutely adored his entire arc of this. It's heartbreaking, but redeeming and just hopeful at the same time. And of course, I love Vin, our main character, and Elend. The one qualm that I have against Brandon Sanderson so far is that he cannot write romance. While I loved Vin and Elend as 2 separate characters, and I liked the general idea of them, like, as a couple, I just didn't care about them as a couple. I did not see the chemistry at all. I haven't through the entire trilogy, but you know, Brandon Sanderson has a lot more to offer, and I kind of just ignore the fact that his writing of romantic relationships lacks any sort of chemistry or, you know, flavor to it or flair. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. This book had me absolutely bawling by the end of it. People say that this is one of the best, like, series endings they've ever read, and I don't know what I would classify as my, like, the best series ending that I've ever read. However, I did really enjoy this one, and I thought that it was just perfectly constructed in terms of, like, specific characters and their character arcs, and kind of the emotional complexity of it, and also just the level of gravity that it had. In this book, the world is literally going to hell in a handbasket. You're sitting there and just the stakes are getting higher and higher, and the situation is getting worse and worse, and this is one of those books that I literally was just like, I really don't think there's a way to fix this, and I really don't see how there's going to be like a happy ending or how they're going to win in the end. And I just really enjoyed how this sense of dread just escalated higher and higher and higher throughout the entirety of this book. But I also really appreciated the ending, and I think that it was done phenomenally, and I highly recommend this trilogy if you are just looking for a high fantasy trilogy. I think Sanderson explains things really well. It is a rather complex trilogy, but I do think it is laid out very well, but I did end up giving this one 5 stars because of how much I cried at the end. And then, buckle your seatbelts. Alright, get ready for this, because first time in the history of this channel, I read a nonfiction book, and that would be, hold on, it's kind of a long title, so I'm going to read it off. Unthinkable, What the World's Most Extraordinary Brains Can Teach Us About Our Own by Helen Thompson. I listened to this on audiobook. Somehow my brain was like, in order to clean the apartment, let's listen to an audiobook, and why don't we use nonfiction in order to motivate ourselves to clean the apartment? Nonfiction and cleaning, 2 things I normally just don't, like, gravitate towards engaging in, ended up coming together, and it worked beautifully. I absolutely, like, was so fascinated with this book. So basically, Helen Thompson went to school, and she's got a degree in neuroscience. She is a scientific journalist, and she decided to meet up and interview 10 people with some of the world's most unique and strangest mental disorders. So this book is broken down into 10 chapters, so each person gets their own chapter, and Thompson goes through and discusses kind of the case study of this particular person, kind of starts discussing the mental disorder or kind of the issue that they are living with, kind of starting back when it was first recognized as something that could happen to people, and then worked its way through history as people kind of explored kind of the different regions of the brain that may be causing this, and kind of the people who have experienced this leading up to the person in present day that is living with this. And she explained not only like their general experience in like the scientific sense, but her whole purpose was to talk about each of these people and talk with each of these people in order to bring back the human side of each of their stories, to remind people that yes, they are kind of a scientific case study, but behind the disorder is a person, and is a person that has to live with this. And she discussed kind of like how they go about their day-to-day lives, how they've learned to navigate the world that to them looks very different different than the average person. There was a person who was perpetually lost even in her own home. There's another person that spent several years of their life convinced that they were dead, and another person who has a very extreme case of synesthesia, among these other case studies. And I just really enjoyed how, first of all, Thompson explained the science and kind of the basic understanding of what each of these disorders are and kind of how they may be linked to certain regions of the brain and how certain regions of the brain work in a very easy to understand sense, so that you do not have to have any sort of like science or neuroscience background in order to follow this book and appreciate it. But I really appreciated how focused Thompson was on making the reader remember and recognize that these are people, and remembering that they see reality in the world differently than we do, but in kind of a general sense, how I experience the world in reality and how I perceive it is very different than the next person just in general. Nobody experiences reality the exact same, and that's kind of an important thing to remember. And yeah, I found it very interesting, and I think if this is kind of a topic that you're curious about, I would recommend checking this out. I did really enjoy the audiobook. Thompson actually narrates it herself. She's very easy to listen to, but I did end up giving this 4 stars. After that, I read The Hanjin Murders by Saishi Yokomizo. So this is a murder mystery, and Yokomizo is kind of a renowned mystery writer in Japan. This book was written in the 40s. So this is the first book in the detective series Kasuke Kandaichi, and they are slowly being translated into English. I think there's 77 of them, and so far there's 3 that have been translated into English, and I think the 4th one will be translated and published sometime this year. Basically, we are in this village, and this family that's kind of the rich leading family has the head of the household getting married soon, and on the eve of the wedding, a murder occurs, and both the bride and groom are murdered in their house. But all of the doors and windows are locked from the inside, and there's snow on the ground, there's no footprints, and a bloody samurai sword is plunged into the snow well away from the house. And so we spend the book trying to figure out who the killer was and how they pulled off this murder that is seemingly impossible. I had a lot of fun with this book. This very much feels like a classic murder mystery, and which makes sense because it is written in the 40s, so kind of during the same time period that Agatha Christie's novels were coming out and all of this other more classic murder mysteries. I really enjoyed how the author kind of breaks the 4th wall in this book. It's actually something that I normally don't like, but I had a lot of fun with it in this one. We're kind of reading it as if Yokomizo is this man that, you know, isn't obviously a mystery writer, and so he's traveling around trying to find inspiration for his next book, and he stumbles across this village that is talking about this mysterious murder that occurred and was solved by this genius detective several years ago, and so he gathers all the information of how this happened and how Kandaichi solved the murder. There was definitely a pretty good twist in the middle, and also, you know, at the end when the reveal happened, and I liked how there was all of these just really weird like circumstances that were involved in this book, and in kind of the setting of like the murder and everything, and how they were seemingly random but yet all had a very plausible explanation at the end. It was very fun to see how they got explained. My biggest qualm was that because this is so short, we did not get a very good picture of kind of the personalities and like general understanding of the characters until the very end, when the big explanation of like how it all worked out happened, and then we suddenly get these very detailed, in-depth breakdowns of characters and their motives, and it felt almost unfair to finally get a good understanding understanding of characters at the very end during the how it's done explanation, when really we should have gotten those explanations all throughout the book. You know, we did get very, very bare glimpses into characters and kind of their inner workings, but not to the extent that they were explained at the end, and I just felt like we should have at least met halfway there and given the reader more before the end of that. But overall, I did really enjoy this, and I definitely think I'm in my murder mystery era now, and I gave this 3.5 stars, but I do plan on hopefully continuing the rest of the series, catching up, and then continuing as they get translated. And then the last book that I read was A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee. This is the Owl Crate edition with the beautiful silver edges. So in this book, we're following our main character, Felicity. She is recently coming back to her all-girls boarding school after being away for a year after her girlfriend's death. And when she comes back, she meets Ellis, who has just transferred into the school, who is kind of this prodigy author, and she's come to the school for her final year in order to study the Dalloway Five for research for her books. And the Dalloway Five are these 5 girls that at the beginning of the school's creation were said to be witches and all died in very mysterious, gruesome ways throughout the course of a year. And so Ellis recruits Felicity in order to help with her research for her book and to help her recreate each of the deaths of the Dalloway Five. This book is absolutely steeped in the dark academia, spooky ghost story vibes, and I absolutely was thriving with it. I really loved Lee's writing style. She is another one that has a very particular way of like choosing just the right words to describe things. This book is very atmospheric, and there's just kind of a creeping sense of dread throughout the entirety of it. We quickly learn that we are reading this from the point of view of an unreliable narrator, and while there does seem to be almost 2 separate stories going on in this book, I really liked almost how chaotic that made the book feel. We are following Felicity and Ellis as they explore the Dalloway Five and their history, but we are also following Felicity as she works through her grief and guilt over her girlfriend's death, and it's just a very interesting exploration of both of those stories. I do wish that we got almost a little bit more of Ellis and Felicity exploring the Dalloway Five. I do think that there was much more focus put on Felicity and her exploration of grief. However, the way this book kind of spirals into a sense of increasing chaos and kind of instability, I thought was really well done. I was impressed with the ending. I really enjoyed it. I know a lot of people have complained about the ending, and I do seem to be kind of in the minority in terms of people that I have heard from that have read this. I seem to be in the minority of those who really enjoyed this book, but I had a lot of fun with it, and I really enjoyed both Ellis and Felicity as characters. I found them both very fascinating to read from, and kind of their relationship to be very also fascinating to read about, and kind of how it had several different layers to it. But overall, I really enjoyed this and I had a lot of fun, and I gave it 4 stars. So those are all the books that I read in January. I think that I had a really stellar reading month overall. I definitely have some new favorites. I finished a trilogy and a duology, and just overall, yeah, I think it was a really overwhelmingly positive reading month. If you've read any of these books or you're looking to read any of them, please let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you consider sticking around and subscribing, and as always, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!